Last Monday morning on June 1st, the Bishop of Washington, Marion Buddy, invited Episcopal clergy to hold a prayerful presence of hospitality at St. John's Lafayette Square. After receiving that invitation, I decided to go. And at about 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon, I arrived in downtown DC. Now, I had been a seminarian at Virginia Theological Seminary from 2015 to 2018, and also a seminarian at Church of the Epiphany, which is just a couple blocks east of the White House on G Street. And that's where I started my day at 4 o'clock. Immediately after getting out of my car, I was flagged down by a passerby who noticed that I was a priest and wanted to know what I thought about the protests and the riots. I told him about the bishop's request for us to hold a prayerful presence, but also told him that we were standing there in solidarity with those protesting the killing of George Floyd and those protesting a deeply flawed and sometimes racist criminal justice system. That conversation, I think, was marked by mutual respect and interest for each other's opinions. Like so many of the other conversations that I had, eventually I made my way to in front of St. John's, where I found a couple dozen of Episcopal clergy and lay leaders. And I was there for about an hour and a half. And during that time, lots and lots of people came up to speak to us and to me. Some of them were antagonistic, but most of them, the vast majority of them, came to express concern and lament over what happened to the church. It had been set on fire the night before. It was serious, but it didn't do structural damage. But mostly to request prayer for the events that had followed in the weeks prior, but especially the week before. The uncertainty and chaos that had followed, and a deep sense of grief and pain. Now, having been a seminarian from 2015 to 2018, I had had lots of chances to participate in protests and demonstrations and public prayer vigils at the White House and the Congress. And what I found at Lafayette Square was a pretty routine protest, not exceptional really in any way. There were lots of people there holding signs, some people speaking through microphones and speakers. There was music, but something just characterized completely by a peaceful gathering. Now, as was my practice at Epiphany, after each Sunday, after many of the Sundays, at the end of the service, I would walk around the White House grounds in prayer. One of my favorite images in the Bible is of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, that as Jesus prepared for his persecution and trial and crucifixion, he spent the night in prayer. And I love the image of Jesus refusing to look away, filled with presence and spirit. He spent that night in meditation and in prayer to God. And I think about that all the time when there is very difficult things in the news, that as Christians we are called to not look away, to be invested, to be mindful, to pay close attention, and to pray. And so oftentimes I would spend those Sunday afternoons walking in the White House, praying for the country, for the neighborhood, and for those people affected by injustice. My practice in the past had been to start in Lafayette Square and to walk around the South Lawn and to head back to Epiphany. Usually it was about a 25 minute walk, but with the added security, so many of those regular entrances have been blocked off. And so I walked from Lafayette Square, H Street, all the way down to Constitution and around back up to G Street. And as was my practice back then, it continued to be my practice. The security forces around the White House who stand there all day with no one to talk to and a bit of tedium, I would always say hi, ask them how they're doing. This time, Those guys oftentimes seem very intimidating and stone-faced, but when you talk to them, so much of that falls away, and their smiles and oftentimes good, brief conversations. This time I told them to stay safe and to be careful, but also to be kind to those people in front of the White House, that they are their neighbors and friends. And there's good feedback and response. This time, one of the things that was very unusual, there was, of course, a much larger security presence there, but as I got further back, closer to the South Lawn, I noticed two large military transports, each full with men in fatigues, about 20 or 30 men in each of these large transport trucks for personnel. Had never seen anything like that. And as I made my way around, it took me about 45 minutes to get all the way around, 30 to 40 minutes to get all the way around this huge block of marked off space. And as I got around, when I got closer to G Street towards the end of my journey, trip around the White House, I noticed that those military transports had moved from the South Lawn to right at the boundary at Lafayette Square. Now, I texted my parents, my mom, who was particularly concerned that I was going downtown, especially given the unrest the night before. And I remember texting her as I left that it was a calm and peaceful scene. Of course, I was horrified to see, returning home, that that peaceful protest had, just minutes after I had left, descended into chaos at the hands of the security forces that I had witnessed take position just outside Lafayette Square. And the president had given a speech and claimed that he was the friend of all peaceful protesters. And some of this gets lost in the news. There was a curfew that had been set for 7 p.m. that night, but when the security forces moved into Lafayette Square, it was just after 6, well before the curfew went into place. Those people were gathered peacefully. There had been no overt or implicit violent acts on anyone's part, So at the same time, when the president was claiming to be a friend of all peaceful protesters, those security forces moved in to forcibly remove not just the protesters, but also the clergy and lay leaders who had gathered in front of St. John's. They were forcibly removed with tear gas and flashbang grenades, and also the use of rubber bullets. Of course, it was grotesque to see the president clothe himself in symbols of religious authority while simultaneously taking these actions to forcibly remove with violence people who were lawfully gathered to stand in solidarity with people in grief, people who were moved to stand up for an America defined by a rule of law and justice for all, especially those on the margins who had experienced injustice. I don't have much of a speech here. I wanted to recount my experience, but also to draw our attention to this image of Jesus. These are earth-shaking times. And when Jesus experienced his own earth-shaking moments just before his journey to the cross, he prayed. He stayed awake. He refused to look away. We are a people defined in our baptismal covenant to respect the dignity of every human being, to resist evil, to be a people defined by justice and mercy and peace and truth. So this is our moment as a church, to not look away, to band together as people of faith with our brothers and sisters in this town and in this country who are called by similar ideals to justice, justice for all, for every human being, and the right of those people to stand up and protest when those basic human rights are violated. We must be vigilant, and we must remain true to our core values. Would love to hear about your own experiences these last few days. Would love to invite you to join with our church as we pray and as we seek a way forward to not just address the issues de jure, the issues of today, but these systemic issues that we must not look away from. I look forward to walking on this journey with you. Peace.